Hey everyone, welcome to the Coach Catalyst podcast. This show is about helping you grow as a coach by standing on the shoulders of giants. Each show, you get a different mentor in your ear. The early motivations, the successes, the failures, the tools, the tricks, and the insight into where the industry is going. All of it so you can make your own dent in the world. Remember, success leaves clues. Now, without further ado, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Season 3 of the Coach Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Whitworth. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joel Jamison. Today we're specifically speaking about Morpheus, a technology and a hardware that helps people improve their cardiorespiratory fitness. Now, this is a really cool piece of hardware because it tells you how much time you should spend in each zone to improve your cardiorespiratory fitness. It also measures your HRV and does a bunch of other really, really cool things. Now, we have a software here and we have a hardware, and we have a 10-year success story. So we see what they're doing today, but how they got there, that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. So if you're interested in building products, if you're interested in Morpheus, if you're interested in heart rate training, this is going to be a great episode for you. So without further ado, let's flip over to the other side with Joel Jamison of Morpheus. Joel, welcome to the Coach Catalyst podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Man, I'm really excited about this episode, mainly because I have followed you. I've followed your work. I've followed Morpheus. I've followed all of the things that you've been doing. And so I'm really grateful for you being in our industry and really leveling it up. And so I want to kick this thing off, right? Like, where did the idea for Morpheus come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a long story, so I'll try to not pick 10 years to tell it because it's been more than 10 years. But so really the genesis was just using heart rate variability. And I was introduced to this technology, which is now somewhat all over the place. You know, it's in Apple Watches and Garmin and Oura. It's at least out there quite a bit. But when I was introduced to it around 2001, nobody had any idea what the hell this thing was. And I was introduced to it by a Russian company who was really the first one to take HRV away from or outside the medical field and apply it to sports performance and health and training. And they had been involved, a couple of scientists had been involved in the original research back in the Soviet Union, where they were essentially building this platform to be used in the Soviet Union Olympic teams and national teams. So they had basically gotten really far in the project, and then the Soviet Union collapsed, basically, and the whole thing just kind of went by the wayside until, by somewhat happenstance, these individuals who were really impressive, they were like PhD MDs that had like run 400 meters Olympics. I mean, just insane. These guys all kind of ended up attracting Eugene. They started talking about the project and they decided they should continue on with it. And so the first version of HRV was like this $35,000 laptop with this Russian software and this electrodes. I do like full EKG, would attach a bunch of electrodes to people. And I have them come to my gym and they'd lay down the training table and I'd connect all these wires to them and I'd plug them into a little black box and all this stuff would happen on the screen. And this was really the earliest days of HRV. But to me, it was such an amazing thing to have this insight into what was happening, into how people were training and how they're responding to it and how much their lifestyles impacted them and all these sorts of things. So again, this is 20 years ago. This is before mobile apps. This is before Fitbit. This is before any of these things were out there. And so it was really just kind of the forefront of figuring out how do I use all this stuff and use this data. And I learned how important it was because it really, I would say the first thing I learned just using HRV was how much of a difference their lifestyle made on direct results from the gym. And I realized really quickly, someone's sleep, someone's nutrition, someone's stress, their work, these things are such big variables that I had no window into before. And I was just guessing what their workout should be and just kind of going with it and hoping the plan works. But when you start looking at data, you get a much more clear picture. So anyway, my first interest was...
Let me stop you for a second.
Sure.
You kind of like brushed over this. I just met like these Russian guys. Like, how did that come to be where like
it's a good
you got
story,
connected with that? I want to know that story.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty funny. So there's a guy, Randy Huntington, who's pretty under the radar, but he's a phenomenal coach, extremely successful, progressive coach. He coached Michael Lewis to break Carl Lewis's long jump record, which was like a 20+ year world record that stood. And he coached Michael how to beat that record. And he had been using this thing called the Omega Wave. And I didn't know Randy really well, but he was from my area, and I'd met him and been introduced to him to somebody I don't even remember. And I just kind of had a conversation with him and kind of asked him, like, what would you, I was young, I was like 22, 21, something like that. And I just kind of said, hey, do you have any advice, like anything you can offer? Like, I really would love to get to the level you're at. He was at USA Track and Field with head of strength and jumps, and was, like I said, an extremely experienced, knowledgeable coach. And he said, you need to call Val. And I was like, what? Call Val? What does this have to do? I don't know who Val is. So he gives me a name and a number, and I writes it down. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do whatever Randy says. And so I call this number up, and I hear this really thick accent in Russian, and he says, I'm in your area tomorrow. Can you meet? And I'm like, yeah. I still have no idea what I'm meeting for. And he's like, come to airport, 4 p.m. or something like that, airport hotel. I'm like, okay. I have no idea what is happening, right? But I trust Randy probably gave me this information for a reason. So I go down to this airport hotel, and I see this tall, like 6'3", looked Eastern European, Soviet Union, like might be KGB, you never know. And he basically introduced himself, and he's like, lay down on couch. Like, lay down on couch. Like, am I the camera show here? It's like, what is going on?
Right.
So anyway, I laid down on the couch, and he's like, take your shirt off. I'm like, literally in a hotel lobby by the SeaTac airport. And at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm just going with it. What am I going to do? So I take my shirt off. He like pulls his briefcase. He has this big briefcase that he opens up. He pulls out a laptop. He pulls out all these wires and just cords and cables and all kinds of shit. Connects everything together, like puts a bunch of electrodes on me. And like, he's like, don't move. And I'm just sitting there with all these wires coming out from me, laying on a couch in a hotel. And after like 3 minutes, I see all these numbers bouncing around the screen. And he's like, your cardio is very bad, but you're very strong. And he like starts telling me quite a bit about different aspects of my physiology. They were pretty spot on. I mean, I definitely at that point lifted a lot of weights. My cardio was pretty poor. I really wasn't into that side very much. I mean, some of that you could just see by looking at me. But he started to tell me a lot more things about just my physiology and how I was made up, and things I'd done for training. It was just really crazy that he was able to get anything right after just putting some electrodes on me. I thought it was somewhat voodoo. But he started to explain the story of what I just told you, that these Russians had taken HRV, HRV's been around since like the 50s. Even before that, they were aware of HRV going way back in time. But the 50s, 60s, it was used in the Russian cosmonaut program to help monitor effects of space on human beings, and it had been used in medical research. It had been around for a long time. But the Soviets were really the pioneers of it, and it was their idea to use this data to help train the Soviet athletes to continue their domination, which they had throughout the 80s. And so anyway, he explained the whole story to me, and he said these guys had built the first system called the Omega Wave, which is still actually around. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, this is like the craziest story I've ever heard. And I'm still just laying on this couch with my shirt off, electrodes on me. And, I saw the potential. It was pretty obvious early on that like this had major implications as a coach. And I was like, okay, this is why Randy wanted me to see this thing, because he'd obviously used this as coaching. And so, my question is, oh my God, like I have to have this thing. Like, how much is it? He's like 35,000. I'm like, 35,000 rubles? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, $35,000. Like I said, I was like 21, maybe 20. I don't remember exactly, something like that. And so $35,000 was absurd to me at the time. There was no way I was going to pull that off. But at the time, I had been interning with the University of Washington. I think I was about ready to go over Seahawks at the time. And so I said, well, what if I help introduce this to the U.S. teams and sports and the athletes, to the universities and the teams I'm working with? Is there something we can do? And so he had kind of a used laptop that was an older system. It was the same software, just old shitty laptop, basically. And he's like, do you make payments, right? So he let me essentially make payments on the system, gave me an old used laptop. There was no expense to them at that point. It was just old system. And so he made a deal and just said, good old Russian bargaining, let me take this thing out and make monthly payments on it to help introduce it to other coaches around the network of the teams, because they were really interested in getting to the U.S. market. They were literally just starting. And so long story short, that's how it happened. And I did actually, I think I sold 6 or 7 of them to different teams around the NFL, some teams in college, and introduced it as much as I could everywhere and started writing about it. So that was how I got introduced to it, which, like I said, it is a pretty crazy story. And looking back on it, it's funny. But, at the time, I just realized this thing is the future. Maybe it's not going to look like this, but having this information and being able to use real data instead of just kind of guessing as you fumble along in the dark as someone's training and hope it's working. I realized that was a game changer, and it was worth whatever I was going to pay for it. And fortunately, the Russians are negotiators, and they were willing to work with me on it.
That is an incredible story. I love it.
My favorite thing about Coach Catalyst.
One of the things I love most about Coach Catalyst.
There are lots of things I love about Coach Catalyst.
And the reason why I love Coach Catalyst is that
the accountability off the back of that
is simplicity.
The support is amazing.
It allows me to give so much of me to my clients.
It's the drip feeding of content.
I can schedule lessons for my clients in advance.
Game changer for freeing up time.
It gives me my time back.
It's so simple and so easy.
Hi, I'm Kane, the founder of Coach Catalyst, the #1 accountability and communication software on the market today. We help coaches just like you keep their clients accountable and scale their business beyond what they've ever been able to do before. So if that sounds like something you want, let's take a look at how we can help. So Coach Catalyst was built on the 4 C's of coaching. Those are content, communication, community, and consistency. So for content, you need to go beyond just workouts and deliver the whole experience for the client so they get the results they deserve. For communication, you need to own your communication. If you don't own the communication, you don't own the client. So make sure you stop texting clients and use a centralized platform. For communities, get off of Facebook groups and take ownership over your social group with Coach Catalyst communities. And for consistency, the foundation of all results for clients, we took the best-selling book Atomic Habits and built all these fundamentals right within our app that's going to guarantee to get your clients the best results possible. If you want to start using the 4 C's with your clients, content, connection, community, and consistency, make sure you run over to Coach Catalyst and start a free trial today.
So for those listening that maybe aren't familiar with HRV, can you give us like the quick layman's explanation of what HRV is and why it would be important in like the training process?
We could definitely do a whole podcast on this. I'll try to keep it somewhat brief, but in a nutshell, your body is always trying to survive first and foremost. I don't care what you're doing, your body's first priority is survival. And the biggest way that it does that is by understanding the world around it and making sure that internally your physiology is doing the things that it needs to do. And part of that process is you have these 2 branches, what's called the autonomic nervous system. And that's different from the central nervous system, which walks us around and does that kind of stuff. The autonomic nervous system is running a bunch of functions within the body to essentially keep you alive and adapt to your environment. And it's got these 2 branches. One's called a sympathetic, the fight or flight. People have probably heard about that. That's, your adrenaline's pumping, your heart rate pumping. And that's designed to essentially produce more energy so that you can go out and do something that's, more force, more power, or just dealing with stress. Now, the interesting thing about that system is we can activate it even when we don't necessarily need it through mental stress. If we sit there and think about something stressful or we're doing a mental task that's mentally demanding, our heart rate elevates, our blood pressure elevates, and we get the same effect as if we were actually doing something physically demanding. Now, on the other side of that, you have what's called the parasympathetic system, and that works essentially in counterpoint, but also just kind of in tandem with the sympathetic. It essentially does the opposite of most of those functions. So it slows heart rate down, it decreases blood pressure, it directs energy into restorative recovery, digestion, anabolic protein synthesis, all these sort of things. And so together, these systems not only keep us alive, but they keep us adapting to the world around us, right? So if I go do a workout, well, obviously I need more energy for that workout. My sympathetic system cranks up. I produce a lot more energy. I have adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortisol, all these cool hormones that allow me to lift weights or do my sprints, my cardio, whatever. Well, afterwards, I need to repair those tissues and I need to direct energy to do that. I need to build bigger muscles or more efficient muscles or bigger, more efficient mitochondria or whatever the case may be. That's where the parasympathetic system comes on and it reacts by increasing anabolic activity and driving protein synthesis, digestion, influences behaviors. There's a whole lot of things that the parasympathetic system does that's beyond this context. But essentially, when we talk about exercise, this is what it's doing. These 2 systems are constantly working together to keep us alive. And again, make sure that the training that we're doing is making us more equipped to handle training in the future, which is what fitness is. So in a nutshell, heart rate variability is a measure of that parasympathetic system I just talked about, that rest, digest, rebuild, regenerate, all those sorts of things. It's looking at the activity of that system by measuring its impact on the heart rate itself, because that system impacts the rhythm of the heart rate. And when we see a certain pattern in the heart rate, we know that that system is more or less active than if we see a different pattern in the heart rate. So when we step back in a 10,000 foot view, we look at the short term, we're kind of seeing the daily amount of stress your body's having to respond to, right? Because anytime you turn that stress response system on, the parasympathetic system has to come back on the back end and deal with it. The more stress you put yourself under, the more that parasympathetic system has to respond. So on a daily basis, the best way to kind of think of this is it's giving you a picture of the cost, the total demand that you're placing on your body and how effectively your body is able to deal with that. Now, when we look at the long run, this is really valuable because people's average HRV, their kind of baseline, is indicative of their overall resilience, because the more you can turn that system on, the more capable that system becomes, the more you can deal with stress, the more you can bounce back and be more resilient, the higher training loads you can handle, the less inflammatory you're going to be in the long run. There's all sorts of benefits and reasons you want higher HRV in the long run. So it's really this kind of two-pronged thing here. We look at it on a daily basis or maybe a weekly basis to kind of understand, okay, how much stress am I putting on my body and how well is my body responding to that? Is it a positive or a negative way? And then in the long run, we look at how adaptable and resilient am I as a human being? And higher HRV, is generally better for multiple reasons. Like I said, you're likely to be less likely to get cardiovascular disease. You're less likely to get stroke. You're more likely to just have a longer, healthier life, which people are obviously trained for in the first place, at least they should be. And it has a lot of benefits. So it's a really valuable number. There's a lot that goes into that. And it's taken me years to kind of simplify that down in a way that makes sense and build apps that help people interpret that information, because it is just one number. It's just one number moving around. And if you don't know what you're looking at, it's easy to kind of get lost in, well, why did this number move? And the thing is, again, it's not just differentiating, oh, this is your workout stress, this is your mental stress, this is your whatever stress. No, it's responding to everything that your body has to do. And so you can't necessarily parse those out. And this is, again, one of the interesting things I think is people assume the workout yesterday was really hard, therefore it's going to do X, Y, or Z to my HRV the following day. Well, it's not quite that simple, because your sleep, your diet, your mental stress, what you did yesterday, all of those things play such a huge role, because they are the majority of your time. Workouts an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever. Well, the other 23, 22 hours in between those workouts is playing the biggest role in how your body responds to that workout, as well as just the other variables. So anyway, it's a very, very good, very important catch-all metric for how your body responds to the world around it and how resilient your body is becoming or not becoming over time.
So you're learning all this stuff as you're playing with the Omega Wave and going deep into the science behind it. Yeah. When then did you have the idea hey, I want to make this more accessible to a kind of a broader population? Because my guess is Omega Wave was very much in just collegiate sports, professional sports, people that had, the cash to be able to pay $30,000, $35,000 to have this system.
Exactly. And that was their market. I understand why, because there wasn't that many people that had a clue what it was. So selling a million people at $10 was going to be a problem.
Right.
So that's where they started, right? So I realized it pretty early on how important it was. And at the time I was also, this is 2004, 5, 6, somewhere in there, I was training a bunch of international level fighters. Okay. And a lot of times they'd fly in from Japan or Brazil or wherever, Korea. We trained them for a fight, and then they'd go back to their countries, and we wouldn't see them again until the next fight camp. And when they were with us, I was able to see all this great information, and I'd help them down their training, and they'd get ready for the fight. And then they'd go back home, and I wouldn't have a damn clue what they were doing. They wanted me to give them programming, but I was I can give you a program, but I have no idea whether or not it's going to be what you need at the time, because I can't see in this data I'd gotten so used to coaching with. It became just part of my process of looking at their HRV and then making a decision about their programming. And the biggest thing is you learn how individualized programming really needs to be. And this is the hardest part of training is it really is, N=1, because you are not like anybody else. Your lifestyle is not the same as anybody else. Your genetics aren't the same as anybody else. Your training history is not the same as anybody else. All these things dictate everything. And so you quickly realize what works for one person might be a disaster for somebody else, or even what works for one person one fight camp might not work the next fight camp. Their volumes might need to be totally different because they might have something going on totally different in their life. Or
were you putting them? Were you putting them on the table every time, they came in for a workout, they're getting hooked up and they spend 10 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, every single person I trained for years would come in. They knew the drill. They'd come in. They lay down on the table. It was a massage table, actually. And they knew how to connect electrodes up to it. And then I would just plug it. It was already kind of plugged in the box, and I would just start to test. It was just the standard practice for everybody that came in my gym. And don't get me wrong, they thought I was a lunatic at first. What the hell is this thing? Right. But once you have success and people have bought in, that they're going to do it. The hardest part for me was, it was like I was not just dealing with fighters, I was dealing with a bunch of female athletes, and you had to put electrodes across their chest, which was really delicate at the time. You had to go, like, okay, I'm going to do this, and this is why. And looking back, it didn't bring any issues, but it was definitely always kind of like, okay, I'm going to really explain to you why I'm going to put my hands here. Just bear with me here. But anyway, it was just part of the process of my coaching. And so, like I said, it was really difficult when people would go back to their home countries or they would leave for whatever period of time, and I have no idea what was happening. And you kind of come to rely on that information. It'd be like the best analogy is if you get used to driving on GPS and then someone takes your GPS away, you're like, shit, how do I get there? How do I get somewhere I don't know where I'm going? Like, I don't know. You realize how much more guesswork is in training than you thought there was once you realize the data is showing you something that different you thought you were saying. So anyway, long story short, I approached Omega Wave initially and said, hey, this should be way more available here. This is something everybody should be using, and everybody eventually will be using this. I just kind of saw that eventually this data will drive things. Whether we're there yet or not, I wouldn't say. But I saw that this was something that had to happen, and worked with them for, I don't know, like a year, 2 years, kind of when they were in Portland, Oregon, and Eugene, Oregon. I was in Washington. So I was going down there. We were trying to work on it. They just didn't have the resources, honestly, to make that transition to a consumer app at that point in time. They were still operating off of a computer. Mobile apps were still fairly early. The market wasn't as big as it is now, so you couldn't just make a mobile app and everyone's going to use it. So they had a limited number of resources, and they just kind of didn't really get it done. It took a long time. We weren't really making any progress. I said, well, I'm going to go do this myself, essentially. And so that was the process. I partnered with a guy in the UK who had existing Apple iAthlete that was somewhat similar in nature, and worked with him to essentially launch BioForce HRV in 2012. So that was the first iteration of really what became Morpheus. And again, that was 2012. So I mean, it had been more than 10 years I'd been using HRV at that point. And it wasn't the first HRV out there, but it was in the first 5, let's say, first 3 to 5 that were in the market. So it was still very, very early. There was still a lot of learning how to explain this to people, because again, when you're in the world now, fitness wearables and tracking this data and all this stuff is commonplace. But back then it was completely foreign to most people in the industry, and it took a lot of work just to make people aware of it. But that was really the genesis of Morpheus was BioForce HRV.
I'd recommend this to any coaches or even clinicians out there that are looking to build a business around a product that they already really believe in.
As a brand new user, just being sold on the streamline of being able to put everything in a centralized location, anyone that is just fumbling with Google Sheets to Facebook messages, group messaging, text messaging.
For anybody that wants to be able to coach their clients, many times you use different tools and resources, and when you're trying to manage that, even on a Google Sheet or on regular technology, you're limited on duplicating the data over and over.
I think if I'm going to, recommend the app for anyone, it's going to be myself. If I want to take my business to the next level, so definitely looking to do that in the near future here. Everybody can really benefit from it. I use it in the rehab sphere, but I also utilize it in the training thing. You can do the same thing with nutrition, right? There's so many uses for it.
For everybody, coaches, clinicians, anyone that kind of works in the industry, chiros, PTs, trainers.
This is one simple solution that we can create to all of our users and all our clients.
So if you want to create a way to systematize your business so you can scale, I have not seen a better product for that.
So, I mean, what was the biggest hurdle that you had getting it off the ground early on? Was it the technology, getting that right? Was it more finding a market? What was the first big hurdle?
I'd say, look, the first big hurdle is I'm a strength coach and I'm trying to figure out how to make software and hardware. That's the first hurdle, right? Like my lane is helping people get in really good shape and perform or reach some sort of fitness goal. I'm not a software developer engineer. This is still a challenge for me. Like, this is not my expertise. Now, I was really fortunate in that I lived and worked in Seattle, and my gym was maybe 15 minutes from Microsoft's headquarters. So I had a ton of people from Microsoft coming to the gym, which was really helpful because I was able to get really good feedback from software, like very high. I had some very, very, very high level software engineers at Microsoft that were literally like the best programmers they had. And so, they didn't write code or anything, but they were able to at least point me in the right direction and help me out with understanding what the requirements were, how to help manage the process and just get the ball rolling. And also, Simon iAthlete was a great guy to work with. I still recommend iAthlete for people that are looking for just pure HRV app. I think it's good. He was really good to work with and a great guy. So that really helped. But, the initial challenge is just making this leap from coach to software developer. And, that's still a work in progress because, again, I don't write code. I don't manage software in my daily job. I train people. So it's taken a lot of work to develop some of those skills and to learn painful lessons about hiring and managing developers. I've had probably, 15, 20 different developers over the last 10 years, developing apps. It's taken a lot of effort. So yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge to start with. And obviously once you develop it, you got to market and sell it, but you got to develop it first or the rest doesn't matter.
Right. So, as far as, development is not cheap. Like,
no,
developers are not cheap. Building technology is not cheap. And it's kind of one of those things, right? Where you, like you said, you have to have this thing built before you can sell it. It's really hard to sell the dream in the development world. And so were you just self-funding or were you able to go find people to help fund this thing?
So with Bioforce HRV, I self-funded the whole thing. So because I was working with an existing partner over in the UK, we had basically a revenue share deal more or less. And he did a lot of the work. So it was much lower. It was a much lower cost project, lower barrier to entry. Now, when I built Morpheus, that's where I started to get serious. And the idea with Morpheus was, well, Bioforce HRV is telling you what your HRV is. It's very accurate. It's doing a great job with that. But it's not necessarily painting the whole picture because unless you know how much you've been sleeping, unless you know how much you've been training, unless you know your activity, unless you know these other variables, it's not really helping you connect all the dots, and it's really up to the user to figure all that out. And I still think that's the biggest challenge. Is if you just give somebody HRV number, 90% of the population is going to have no real idea what it means. The app's going to have to do some heavy lifting for you, and really wanted to paint more of a picture of how to take that information and make it more useful. So at that point, I raised some money and I brought in two partners, both of which were MIT grads, one of which was an MIT software engineer that was working at Amazon as an engineer. And the plan was, bring on an actual partner who knows what the hell he's doing when it comes to building software and go from there. And, unfortunately, the partnership didn't work out. The people I brought on just wasn't a great fit. And so I had to kind of go back to scratch of build myself. But I did raise some capital there to get the ball rolling with that. And really part of the big plan with Morpheus wasn't just to build something for people to use individually, but for coaches to use, because I realized how valuable this information was to me as a coach, and other coaches would feel the same way once they learned how to use it. And so the plan was always to build the Morpheus app for users, consumers, people to try it out, but then make sure we built the platform for coaches to access all that data and build the education around that. And so as we went, this is a whole long story that we can get into, but this is where, I took things to the next level and then things came crashing down. But we partnered with Gold's Gym in 2019 or whatever it was. And they provided a huge amount of funding to build out the coaching platform. And we started to build this whole thing for them that was going to power their next generation of small boutique gyms they were going to launch to partner or to compete with the smaller boutique gyms that were kicking their ass in the gym market at the time, and ultimately COVID happened and they declared bankruptcy and they got sold and a bunch of stuff happened. But that was a lot of funding that fortunately was able to be used. We didn't get all of it, but we got a good amount of funding through them that helped us build the coaching platform and continue the Morpheus development. So it was definitely not the best outcome, but it did provide some funds for growth and allow me to build a team out and allowed us to build the coaching app and the whole platform around that. So it's been a lot of kind of different areas where this has come from, but some of it's been self-funded, and some of it's from Gold, some of it's from our initial partnership. There's lots of different pieces that come into play there.
Right. So does that, as far as like an ownership, do you have like a really large cap table then of like all these kind of different pieces in it, or have you been able to kind of keep control over?
No, it's
over
pretty small actually. Yeah. I bought out the original, the original investors that were my partners. I bought them back out. Gold's didn't have any ownership whatsoever, and they basically had a 7-figure pledge. It's part of they were going to get basically the customized development that they were paying for, so they had no ownership. I had a couple of smaller investors early on that are still involved. And then we had a couple local friends and basically just local friends that owned a local store that been web developer or built a hosting company back in the day that invested some money. But we've really, the cap table is pretty clean. There's not really that many people that have ownership. I still have by far the vast majority.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, I mean, the other thing you're running into a little bit, especially early on, if we go back 10 or 12 years, is even in the fitness space, right? Like there's not a lot of people that are talking about HRV. Like it's not like a common term. And so you developed a certification, a conditioning certification. And was that kind of a little bit to help see if we can prop the industry up a little bit to get them this knowledge? And then maybe it's potentially a use for this product, or was that just kind of like, hey, I want to, get this knowledge out there?
Well, yeah, it was both. I mean, I launched the certification because I'd been once I wrote my book, Ultimate Conditioning, back in 2009, I started getting a lot of requests pretty early on from teams and gyms and just different organizations to come in and do talks, do 1 day talk, do a 2 day talk, whatever the case may be. And so I spent a few years just traveling around the world, just educating. And, the good thing is as technology was progressing, people were, on the coaching side, at least more interested in it. They were asking questions, and conditioning has always been I feel like it's a black box for people. They know that they need to improve it, but they're not really sure what's happening underneath the hood in their training or if it's getting better. Right. So as I started lecturing about that sort of stuff, I naturally started talking about HRV and got a lot of teams and organizations using Bioforce. But I kind of got sick of traveling. I mean, I was like in the UK and Australia and Hong Kong and China in like a 3-week period. I'm like, I got to stop this. And so I built the online certification course in 2016 or 2017. Just to make it a lot more scalable and get me to be able to not have to go all over the place to build this educator, to offer the education. So it was I've always seen they have to go together. You have to have the product, Morpheus and other tools, but you need the education of why to use it, what it's doing for people, why it's important, how to use it, all that sort of stuff. And so really, I think the education and technology go hand in hand because, like I said, HRV, I would still say that HRV is very under, maybe misunderstood is probably the best way. I still see a lot of people out there, well, HRV up is this and HRV down is this, and just very overly simplistic ideas of how it works, which I understand why they want to simplify. And you have big companies out there that are now educating people in mass. And again, they're oversimplifying because they don't want to talk about the nuances of it. Unfortunately, it is a nuanced metric. For example, one thing is there's a huge difference between measuring your HRV overnight versus measuring your HRV once a day, which is how I do it, how I believe it should be done because it's the most accurate. But there's companies that are selling devices that are designed to measure overnight, of course, aren't talking about the limitations of that because it undermines their product to some extent. Also, you can't compare a number of an HRV number from one system to another system most of the time because they're measured differently, they're calculated differently, they're filtered differently. It's not like heart rate where it's a very obviously standardized metric. Your heart rate just means how many times it beats a minute, but your HRV as a number can be on a totally different scale, more or less, or at least be using a totally different calculation. So it's not comparable from one system to another. So we get lots of people asking, well, why is my HRV this on Oura and it's this on Morpheus? Well, because they're measuring it completely differently. You can't really compare that. So the good thing about HRV is it's such a valuable metric because what it's measuring. But one of the challenges is it's not the standardized thing where everyone's measuring it the exact same way. And you can just always compare across the board from one system to the next. So you always have this clear idea of what the number is coming from. It's very, very system specific. And there are very serious limitations, in my opinion, in the way that a lot of the commercialized devices are measuring it. So again, that's where education has to play a big role in helping people understand that.
So there isn't just a simple formula. It's not truly like a measurement like heart rate, like beats per minute, right?
No, it's not. There's generally, and this is just a general, there's about 12 different calculations that can be used. And these calculations will all give you very, very different numbers. So for example, Apple Watch uses one called SDNN. A lot of other ones use RMSSD, which is what Morpheus uses. But then you also can do some stuff with that raw data because you get a number that bounces around a whole lot if you just look at RMSSD. There's PNN 50. There's different ways to measure with frequencies. There's many different ways to calculate the average amount of variability in your heart rate across the time that you're measuring it. So the calculations can be wildly different. They can lead to wildly different numbers. Now, they're all telling the same story, but the actual number you're looking at is going to be very, very different from one system to the next. If they're particularly, like I said, if they're using different calculations. So like the biggest ones, Apple Watch uses one, SCNN, that almost nobody else uses. Why they chose to use that one, I don't know. It doesn't move around as much. It's less variable. I'm sure they have their reasons for it, but you just can't take a number from one HRV system and say, oh, well, my HRV is X and have that mean anything, because all it really means is your HRV is X on that system. It doesn't mean my HRV is this. It's not, again, it's not like blood pressure. It's not like heart rate. It's not like a hormonal measurement. It's on a standardized scale. So that's, again, it's one of the challenges is there is no standardization. And like I said, if you're measuring it overnight, you're going to get a very different number than if you measure it first thing in the morning, like you do with Morpheus. They're telling more or less the same things, but you can't compare them. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
Right. Interesting.
My favorite part of the event is...
Favorite part of the event was the networking and the community. It was fabulous.
The energy and the quality of the speakers and information.
So I'd say like the highlight of the event, obviously the speakers have been amazing, but the networking has been great.
The community here, the people, and just those lunches and dinners and hallway conversations. And the presentations have had a big impact in terms of things that inspire me and inform me. So a lot of good things.
The coolest thing about the Coach Catalyst event that I've experienced is one, like Kane, Trevor, and Coach Cap, the energy in the room, the videos, like that stuff matters as far as throughout the day when you start getting tired. People don't realize it.
I would say the best part of the event so far has been the connectivity between the people that are here. It's been comfortable and it has felt very pressure-free.
I like the eclectic lineup, which is different than most other conferences. There usually is like a theme, and this is pretty spread out, which I appreciate. So there's a lot of people bringing a lot of different methods and modalities to the table.
Coach Cal was probably my favorite talk. His energy, the way he speaks, the way he holds himself. I love anything to do with athletes and sport, and if I can take those principles and apply them to business like Coach Cab does, it was unbelievable.
So, I mean, you've been around. I mean, you've been doing this thing from a technology standpoint for the better part of 10 years, if not more. And so are there any times that you can remember that were big breaks in the Morpheus kind of in the journey, like where maybe you thought it was going one way and then this thing happened that allowed you to kind of take that next step forward?
Yeah, I'd actually say that we've made that breakthrough in the last 6 months or so, because the biggest thing I'll say is I think I made a little bit of a mistake in that we want to provide people the best experience of both worlds, where they could measure HRV as conveniently as possible using an armband, because it's easier, quite honestly, to measure HRV laying there with an armband. And then we want to give people the most accurate way to train with a chest strap. This is part of the problem with devices. Just to be clear, everyone should understand this. An arm-based, wrist-based device is not going to be super accurate for training unless that training is fairly monotonous and uniform and cyclic and kind of monotone. If you're doing any sort of training where you're jumping around, you're changing directions, you're at high heart rates, you're doing things, your arms are moving around, those heart rates are not super accurate. They're going to miss stuff. That's anyone who's used lots of devices that are on your arm or wrist. I've realized that. So it's limiting. At the same time, the most accurate way to measure HRV, hands down, bar none, is a chest strap. It's plus or minus about 1 millisecond in terms of its accuracy and ability to measure the peak of your heart rate, which is your R wave. And that's what you have to get right to measure HRV. Optical sensors can be all over the place, good and bad. Some are good, some are terrible. But they're less accurate, slightly less accurate, or way less accurate, depending on the sensor you're talking about. But they're more convenient for most people, particularly the way we do it, which is have people wake up ideally in the morning and measure HRV actively once a day. It's more convenient. So for a long time, we offered 2 devices. One was the armband to measure the heart rate variability as conveniently as possible, knowing that that was not the best for working out, at least a lot of types of working out. And then we offered the chest strap so that you get the best, most accurate workout. Now, I liked the idea in theory, but the problem was we confused a lot of people. Why do I need 2 devices? This thing looks like a watch. It's just a watch that looks like, the armband that we use to measure HRV looked like it may be a watch. So people thought, well, I already have a Garmin or an Apple Watch. I don't need a watch. Anyway, it created a huge amount of confusion to have 2 devices come standard in the package. It raised our cost quite a bit. It raised our manufacturing quite a bit. It just led to a lot more customer service and questions. So about 6 months ago, I was hesitant, but I said, okay, we just need to focus on the training piece, because ultimately you're measuring your HRV because you want to optimize your training. At least people that we're working with are. They're not doing it just for the sake of doing it. They're doing it because they want to train more effectively and they want to dial their recovery and that sort of stuff through training. So we focused on just the chest strap piece of this. We got rid of the armband as a part of the process. There's other ones people can use now optionally if they want to for whatever reason. But we focused on the training side of Morpheus, and we launched just the chest strap only Well, we added a feature where we're now able to give you a weekly recommendation for how many minutes you should spend at each of your heart rate zones. And Morpheus gives you each week based on what we've learned across thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of workouts. So we essentially have 3 heart rate zones. You can just think of them as low intensity, moderate intensity, and high intensity. And we did a lot of data analysis where we looked at, okay, people with moderate fitness, low fitness, high fitness, how many minutes per week do they spend in these different heart rate zones when they saw improvements in their fitness, which we defined as lowering their heart rate and increasing their average HRV. And so we did a bunch of development on that. And so now what Morpheus does is it says, it looks at your fitness level and it says, okay, hey, this week you need this many minutes in your low intensity zone. You need this many minutes in your moderate intensity zone. And you need this many minutes in your high intensity zone. And then as you train throughout the week, it's monitoring that. It's looking at your recovery, all sorts of stuff. And then the next week, it's going to reprogram and give you an adjustment to that, right? If it looks like things are going the right direction, it's going to increase some of those minutes. If it looks like things are not going the right direction, it'll either keep them the same or start to decrease them. And so really what we did is made Morpheus much more of a training-focused platform. I think we initially conceived it was more focused on recovery that had a workout feature. But I really wanted to just go all into training and conditioning because that's what I do to begin with. Right. And really use recovery as the tool that drives better training and more effective training. But since we've made that adjustment, we have a ton of people now using Morpheus specifically to try to hit those targets. I built 12 different training methods, conditioning methods I've used over many years into the app. So now it guides you through these different types of training methods. One of them is just you hit zone 2 cardio, boom, it pulls up your zone 2 for you for the day, that kind of stuff. And so since we've made that adjustment, we've decreased our cost to customers. It's lowered the price by a bit by only having one device. It's a simpler story to show one device and talk about why you need just one good chest strap. And with the new features around training, the guidance, and all that sort of stuff, sales have gone up and up and up consistently. We actually doubled. I think we almost doubled the number of workouts we did last year from the previous year. Actually, we more than doubled it.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And so are they still wearing it in the morning then as well to get that morning HRV?
Yeah.
Chest strap on instead?
We did 2 things. One, like I said, we simplified it just a chest strap. But 2, we were able to build an algorithm where if we don't necessarily have your morning measurement, but we have other data from you, we have your overnight heart rate from other wearables, we have your workout from yesterday, that kind of stuff. We're now able to predict your HRV with about 3 to 4 points, which isn't perfect, but it's a good estimation. So people have a choice. They can either decide, okay, I really want to measure it. I want to get the most accurate HRV possible. And HRV, what we use HRV for is to dial in those intensities and to adjust our heart rate zones each day. But if you say, okay, I'm just not going to do it today, you can just estimate, predict, basically. We'll predict their HRV, which again, prediction is not the same as measurement, but it's still a pretty good overall accurate number. And so for most people, we say, look, at least try to measure your HRV at the days you work out. It's going to be the best guidance if you're not going to measure it every day. But this other option of being able to just predict it and get a good score there and still go about your day, even if you didn't measure it, is really important. So that's also, I think, made a pretty big difference. And then the other thing is, we are compatible with really any device as far as training is concerned. If you want to wear an armband for your workout, you can. It's not going to be as accurate, but we are compatible with almost anything out there that's got a Bluetooth connection on it. If you want to use the app, you can do whatever you want. So people still have that flexibility as well.
The Super Coach Summit by Coach Catalyst is.
The Super Coach Summit by Coach Catalyst is.
The Super Coach Summit by Coach Catalyst is.
The Super Coach Summit by Coach Catalyst is room for opportunity.
It's badass. It's fucking awesome. Over-delivered. They talked about it, and they definitely did it.
It is amazing. It's just been invigorating.
Is exemplary. It's phenomenal, and just a great time with great people. And you feel like in Ohana, you feel like a family.
It's unreal.
It is awesome. What will help separate the 1% from the 99%.
Is a really well thought out event, well conceived, well planned, and well executed.
It's such an amazing event to be at in order to grow your business and network with other professionals.
It is top tier. It's one of the best I've been to in the business. It's been unbelievable, and I'm just excited to finish out the day here and keep making connections.
It's an event that you will be very happy that you have attended because next year is going to be even better than this one.
Is freaking badass. If you're not here, you're missing out. See you next year.
Interesting. So looking from like any technological challenges, right? Were you able to use technology that was readily available on the market, just like regular chest strap, normal, call it like a polar chest strap or whatever? Or did you have to kind of come up and tweak the actual technology to create a chest strap that's going to measure heart rate variability more accurately?
Sure. So if we go back to Bioforce, which I think is probably the most interesting and kind of where HRV was. HRV back then, there wasn't Bluetooth 4.0. The old Bluetooth was much worse. And so we used actually an analog little receiver that plugged into the headphone jack. And that headphone jack audio was able to pull the signal off of the old polar straps, the analog signal, not the Bluetooth 4.0 signal, because it wasn't there. So initially that had to be developed, and that was developed by Simon over at iAthlete in the UK, because he was an audio engineer. So that was all props to him, because he came up with that technology to measure HRV off the old analog shitty chest straps. And they were accurate, but to get the data there was much trickier. So that's why there was very few HRV apps. Once Bluetooth 4.0 came out, then it changed the game. You didn't need anything because you could just get Bluetooth data. So the thing is, there's not as many chest straps as you think that actually send the, you need basically what are called the RR intervals, which is the time in between each heart rate. You need that to calculate HRV. There are certainly some Polar sends them, some Garmin sends them, but a lot of them don't, because if their apps don't actually measure HRV, why are they going to include HRV? It takes up a little bit of power and space.
Right.
They're not if they're not using it in their own app, they're probably not setting it. So there's really only a few chest straps out there. I mean, there are a number of them, but not a huge amount. Most of them they don't send RR intervals and don't do HRV. So when we developed the Morpheus number one, I wanted to make sure that it was very accurate, and I wanted to get signal quality and some things like that that make it better. And then we also built the memory function into it. So if you wanted to go do a workout, you didn't have to have your phone with you. You could just go do the workout, come back and load that memory into Morpheus, and it will upload, sync your workout, so it works together. So the chest strap that Morpheus uses is not like a revolutionary chest strap that does something that no other chest strap on the face of the earth does. It's just designed to work really well within the Morpheus ecosystem. But like I said, our goal in the long run is to be as device agnostic as possible and work with whatever devices people have, at least the ones that are accurate, able to good data, and focus less on the device per se and more on the app and delivering as many good features and things through that end.
Like, how do you even begin? Like, hey, I need a better chest strap. Like, where do you even start to find the person that has the knowledge to be able to build the thing? Like, did you just do a Google search, or was it did you talk with your Microsoft people, or how did you even start getting?
It's a good question. I mean, that's the other challenge I would say is China. Working with China is a pain in the ass. It's worse than developers. And so initially I'd reached out to some friends who'd done some manufacturing of different types before in China, nothing to do with fitness or chest straps. They'd manufacture some textiles and some other things over in China. And I really kind of said, hey, how do I find somebody that can help me design what I want to design, basically? And the first thing we designed was actually a Morpheus armband. That was, I initially had the idea that we'd wear this thing overnight. And so I basically got some friends say, okay, here's how you do this. Find the sensor manufacturer, find the companies that you want to have that build the components, and then ask them who they recommend manufacturing wise, because they're sending their devices and their sensors to people in China that are manufacturing. So anyway, I found this company called Balancell, which is really kind of the best optical sensor out there. It's just the little chip that goes into the heart rate monitors. And I said, who do you recommend as a manufacturer? Because they're US based. I said, who do you recommend as a manufacturer? They connected me with one of their preferred manufacturers in China, and I got started essentially that way. And just kind of went from there.
Did you just call them? Did you just call them up and be like, hey, can I talk to the CEO? And then hey, who do you guys use?
I think I just talked to their sales team kind of initially, and then I worked up the chain somewhere and just said, hey, here's what I'm looking to do. I want to manufacture this customized thing, and I want to use your sensors. And of course, they're happy to try to help you find the right manufacturer because they want to sell you sensors. Yeah. So yeah, just kind of reverse engineer that way. But yeah, it's not easy. There's so many companies over there. I mean, if you go to Alibaba or wherever, you're going to find just hundreds of companies. You have no idea what you're dealing with. And so we worked with one company for quite a while, and then we switched to a different company that was using the same sensor that was just a bit bigger and was able to do more customization. It's kind of been that process over time of just once you kind of understand how it works, it's much easier. But the breaking into that was definitely not easy. It's a learning process, and you realize like I said, China sucks. I wish we could manufacture elsewhere.
Were there any?
Now it's what we're doing.
Any good story? I mean, did you at least get any good stories out of it? Did you go visit factories and that kind of stuff, or were there any like?
No,
weird...
I mean, I've been to China several times for basically for workshops and worked with a bunch of their teams, organizations. Not the manufacturing side. I mean, I don't have any good stories. Unfortunately, I have more just them screwing things up than anything else.
Right.
But like I said, it's all part of the learning curve. And like I said, when you take the complexities, I mean, you guys know software is not easy to build. It's hard.
Yeah. And
you take software that's challenging enough to begin with, and then you add this hardware that you're dealing with, another country. Like they sent us 3,000 straps one time with the wrong firmware on it before we'd added an ability to update the firmware in our app. So we, stuff like where you're like, I got to spend 6 weeks updating the firmware so we could upgrade these straps. They sent us, they're completely worthless until we do that. Just things like that have unfortunately happened. But like I said, it's just part of the journey of learning how to run a business and deal with the ins and outs of technology.
Have you ever had moments where you're like, man, it's like, I'm just going to throw the towel in and I'm going to like, it's not worth it? Or do you feel like you're finding motivation in some of the little things?
Yeah, I mean, look, I like the challenge aspect of it, but I'm not going to lie. There were definitely times where, I kind of thought, is this worth it? Right. I mean, I felt like, we put so much into it. And to be honest, the thing with Gold's, we won't get too much of specifics, but the Gold's Gym contract that I put, months of work into and huge lawyer bills hammering out. We had this contract ironclad, right? Like if Gold's had followed through, if COVID had never happened, Gold's would have opened up a number of these small gyms, and I think that they would have done pretty well. Even if they'd done moderately well, Morpheus would have made a lot of money because we were basically running the core technology that would have made their whole thing possible. And the most likely scenario is the company that owned them at the time, a private equity firm, would have likely just bought Morpheus because it wouldn't have made sense for them to have to spend as much as they were going to have to spend to just keep us as the provider. And it would have been a nice exit, honestly. And then, COVID hits like 5 months into this, my expenses have quadrupled, quintupled because I had to bring all the developers and they stopped paying. Right. They literally just stopped paying the bills and told me to keep developing, right? There's basically nothing in the contract there's nothing in the contract that really allowed them to stop paying. Obviously, there was no like outs for them. And they said, well, we really want you to keep your development team together because it took months to build this team and really get things all going. I went from like 3 or 4 developers to like 12. And they're like, well, we're going to open the gym. This is the early days in COVID. So they're thinking like, oh, in a few months, we're going to go back to full steam ahead. So I'm keeping this full team together and I'm spending huge amounts of money that I barely have or don't have, really taking out loans to do it, take EIDL and payroll loans, anything I can possibly do to keep this thing going. And then they're like, okay, well, we're going to declare bankruptcy, but we're really just kind of cleaning the books and we're going to keep this, this project is really important to us. As soon as, we go through this bankruptcy process, like we're 100% in. And their plan was their same parent company was going to continue to own them. They were just, like I said, they explained that they need to clean the books off, bad debt, blah, blah, blah. Okay, above my pay grade. And then kind of a very unexpected thing happens. They get bought by a German company and the parent company doesn't want to match the offer. And the new company is like, well, why do we want a new gym? Like we just bought Gold's. We don't want anything like this. We're not interested. And so the whole thing is just completely done. After 6 months of them telling me, this is the future of our company. This is so important. You've got to keep this going. I'm just bleeding cash trying to keep this ship afloat. My employees take pay cuts. Like we're all scraping by to try to get this thing out the door and build for them because they're, I'm talking to them nonstop and they're excited about this process and want us to keep going. And then, boom, rug's pulled out from under us. They owe us $500,000. They're in bankruptcy. They don't want the new company wants nothing to do with it. Doesn't want to pay the bills. So yeah, it was definitely, there was times in that process where I'm just like, what am I doing? Right. Like how much am I going to possibly, how am I going to get out of this? Cause it was a lot of debt. There was a lot of, a big team I built. And it was, the idea that we were going to build this and then eventually have a nice exit or be able to have at least a strategic partners and continue to fund growth as long as we needed it to. And then all of a sudden have that gone was tough. And, I'm not going to play the victim. I mean, COVID hit a lot of people. It's not just me, and lots and lots of people did that and had serious problems and struggled and died. And so COVID was much worse than just my problems, but it certainly made me question the feasibility of continuing to build Morpheus and whether or not it was worth it. It was definitely a difficult time.
So, I mean, obviously you've weathered the storm to an extent and found ways. And were you coaching as well? Were you kind of doing consulting and coaching and that kind of stuff at the time?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, obviously you kind of weathered the storm through that. And was there a point where you're like, hey, we're going to pivot this into a slightly different, market and go a little more kind of mass market?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've, like I said, the question has always been, what does Morpheus do exactly? And it was tricky when it was, well, it does recovery, does HRV, has some training features. It felt like a recovery app. And so then the first thing is, well, how does this compare to Oura? How does this compare to Whoop? How does this compare to all these other recovery tools out there? And so really the pivot or the kind of reshifting focus was training. Like Morpheus fundamentally is a heart rate training app. It's an app for people who want to build their cardiovascular system. They want to improve their VO2 max. They want to lower their resting heart rates, and they want to live longer, perform better. And the good thing for me, and I think this is why we've seen a lot of growth in the last 6, 12 months, is this has become such a big area of fitness now. People want to build VO2 max the first time because people like Peter Attia are out there talking about it, and Huberman and all these people. Attia actually became a user of Morpheus. Every time he posts about it, talks about it, it does extremely well, as you can imagine, because his audience is such a loyal group. And so he talks about doing zone 2 cardio and how he uses Morpheus for that. He uses it to measure recovery. Joe Rogan gave us a shout out. He started using it. So we've had these people that, again, maybe wouldn't have used in the past because it was a little bit more murky about, was it HRV, was it recovery, like what was it? But really, once we focused on, no, Morpheus is a training app. It's not really for people who don't want to work out. It's not really for people who just want to lift weights. That's why we want to do great, but it's not necessarily going to give you anything super valuable if all you do is lift weights. There's other tools that will probably give you the recovery score, the same sort of stuff. But if you want to do cardiovascular conditioning, if you want to build your VO2, again, which is a huge part of longevity, and people now realize that, or you're an athlete, you want to improve your conditioning for your sport, there's no better app out there. There's no better tech out there to allow you to do that, period. And so once we've focused and simplified and gone that direction, things have turned around and gotten a lot better, and they're continuing to get a lot better as we build out the features that are a part of this now. So that was really I think the important thing we need to do.
How did you come to that realization? Was it a lot of market research? Was it just a lot of conversations? Was it like an aha moment in the shower? But how did you we need to go this way?
It wasn't really an aha moment in the shower. I think it was just an evolution over time of talking to users. What do you do with Morpheus? What would you like us to do with Morpheus? What would you be most inclined to use if we were to build these set of features? And just kind of going down the thought process, like seeing what other apps were doing, seeing what other apps weren't doing. I mean, again, there's lots of recovery apps. Like I said, everyone's aware of them, but none of them really, in my mind, make your workouts better. They don't. They give you a recovery score. That's about it. And they don't do much beyond that and let you kind of figure out the rest. And so, just my expertise was in training to begin with. And so that was really kind of the area I felt we could have the biggest advantage. The more and more I thought about it, more and more I talked to people about what they wanted was, Morpheus can help me make my workout better. If they can do that, and I'm all in. And so we just, the hard part for me was shifting to the chest strap only, because I kept thinking, well, people don't want to measure HRV with a chest strap, and people don't like chest straps and blah, blah, blah. But honestly, it's more accurate. I think enough people are actually realizing how shitty the data was with other devices that a chest strap, it's maybe not their favorite thing to wear in the world. But if you get really good data out of it, and the alternative is you get really shitty data with something that's more comfortable, those people are more willing to now wear chest straps. Again, I think that's also important, is we're not training, or we're not targeting people who need motivation to get off the couch. More power to them. There's a huge market that serves that, and I commend them for that. But that's just not who's going to use Morpheus. If someone never works out, if somebody never does any cardio, if somebody has just no aspiration to do that, Morpheus is really not the right tool. So why try to build Morpheus for those people? It just doesn't make sense. And so, it's a little bit more cumbersome to wear a chest strap. Sure, it's a little more cumbersome to have to measure HRV every day. But if you're serious enough to go to the gym an hour a day, 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week, then you can put in an extra few minutes to measure HRV and wear something that's maybe slightly less comfortable, but 10 times more accurate, and get the results and actually turn that data into something meaningful.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost like you you have to be in the game. Like if you would have given up on this, let's say the Gold's Gym, and that just was like the final nail in the coffin, right? You don't get to this point. And so in a way, in the business journey, it's like you have to be in it long enough in order to like listen to users long enough until you start to find like, all right, this is our path. Because I mean, you're 10 years into this thing, right? Like,
yeah, literally. Yeah, I mean, like I said, well, Bioforce, you kind of talk about the Bioforce, because that was 2012, and we're in 2024. So really 12 years since I launched the first HRV app, and we started developing Morpheus, and I want to say it was 2016 or 2017. So even that,
right,
6 years, 7 years. So yeah, it's been a long. Yeah, there's definitely plenty of times where I could have said this isn't worth it. Like, here's the other thing is, I was fortunate that my revenue, a huge amount of revenue, was coming from coaching and my certification and consulting. I didn't have that revenue. I probably would have had the full shop, because that was what allowed me to pay my bills. I didn't have to take a huge salary from Morpheus. I didn't have to, pay my lifestyle by selling Morpheus. I could just let Morpheus build and do whatever it could while I was collecting my own income and salary from everything else I was doing. So that was another key of how I was able to continue doing it when time got tough.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. So, I mean, looking a little bit at the future of Morpheus, like really, there's a tech hardware component to it, but that's not necessarily the proprietary aspect. It's more like all of this data that you're collecting from all of these users, and kind of like you said, giving these zones. So like, hey, you want to lower your resting heart rate, you want to improve your heart rate variability. We have all of this data from workouts that allow us to be able to develop the kind of the algorithm or the system to do it. So is that kind of like, just, do you see that as the future, is just getting more of that data and becoming better at predicting this stuff?
Yeah, exactly. It's getting more of that data. And then look, I think there's kind of two general ways that people go about training. Okay. In my mind, at least. Number one is, you get a personalized program that's, built around you, your fitness level, your availability, your equipment, your goals, et cetera. That's a very personalized process. It's time intensive for somebody writing it, and takes some knowledge and expertise to do that. The second way is, if you just generally get in the right amount of volume intensity each week, you're going to make consistent progress. And that's where you just, like I said, Morpheus says here, hit these numbers of minutes per week in your zones, and you're going to see improvements because other people have done the same thing. And what our goal really here is to build out a workout structure within that. So if Morpheus says you need X number of minutes in each of your 3 zones, you will be able to select from workouts that'll help you hit those minutes. Now, those workouts won't necessarily be individualized to you. It's not a personalized one-on-one developed program, but they're at least workouts that'll equal the right volume intensity over a weekly period. And that's where really the bulk of the stuff comes in for the average human being to get better. It's do the right amount of work and do the right amount of intensity at work. If you can do those things consistently, you will get better. That's much more challenging than people think it is. The reason people often fail is because they're either doing not enough, they're doing too much, they're going too hard, they're not going hard enough. Those are very difficult questions to answer for most people, because there are so many variables at play. Your sleep influences it, your lifestyle, your nutrition, your current. There's so many things that influence how much training you actually need to get better and how hard that training needs to be. And so if Morpheus can say, look, here's the blueprint, right? Here's how many minutes you need per week. And then each day I can go in and pick a workout that's going to give me a certain number of minutes to move the needle in that direction. Then I think you've got a really, really good solution for people to be able to, improve their HRV, lower their heart rate, VO2, all those sorts of things, without having to put a huge amount of thought into it. And there's still going to be a personalized element to it, because the weekly volumes and intensities are personal to them. We can just give you workouts that are more broad that you can then choose to do how you want to do. And then the second thing is, at some point, I have a conditioning program right now, an 8-week program you can buy that is all built on Morpheus. So you can go through it. It's a general health and wellness, longevity, performance, kind of broad fitness goals. It's not specific to a sport, but it's a conditioning-based program. And you can use Morpheus as the tool to do that. So my plan here over the next 6 months, 12 months, will be to build out a whole lot more of those programs for different goals. So people that want to be, get ready for a team sport, people that want to get ready for a fight or combat sport, people that want to play, I don't care, golf or pickleball or whatever. I like to build out a bunch of conditioning programs that are goal specific. And then Morpheus is essentially the tool that allows you to get the most out of it and personalize it.
So would Morpheus then kind of change your time? Like, hey, okay, you're a court sport athlete, right? You spend a lot of time in a high intensity range. All right, we need more training up here versus down here. Would those shift around?
Yeah, well, ideally what you do is you should wear your Morpheus chest strap or whatever else, record all those workouts, and then all this contributes towards your weekly volumes and intensities. And so the program I write will obviously be different for a team sport athlete who's training 3-4 days a week than somebody who's not, right? So my conditioning program will be substantially different, and then Morpheus will help you just dial things in as you're going about your week. So if your practices are 3 hours long, you see your recovery change, you're hitting all your minutes, you're going to be more dialed in than if you just kind of threw a conditioning program on top of your program in the actual sport without seeing the overlap there.
Right. No, that's super cool. And so is it just app-based, or is there a web-based portal to it as well?
There's an app. It's just app-based right now, but we're actually in the middle of building a web portal that'll allow you to do a lot more things, see the graphs and be able to export data and just have a bigger view of platform of everything that's web-based. The Coach app right now, again, we didn't talk about that. The Coach app that we have right now is an iPad-based device that allows you to see essentially all the data of anybody you're training. So if anything they have coming in through Morpheus or anything that they integrate with. So we kind of didn't talk too much about this, but Morpheus pulls in activity and sleep from a variety of devices, from Garmin, from Apple Watch, from Fitbit, from Oura, anything that plugs into the Apple Health or Google Fit, we pull that in. So we share all that data with anyone using the Coach app. So again, if you're coaching people, you want to see all that sort of stuff. It's iPad-based right now, but we are working on a web-based system that'll make it much easier. The reason it's Apple or iPad-based is because you can also do live heart rate training with it. So if you have a gym, you have a class, you want to put heart rate monitors or heart rates up on the screen. It does that. It does that through the iPad. But for those people who don't necessarily want to run classes per se, or they don't have that model, they want to just do online or whatever, the web-based portal will be something that will allow them to do that. And we're working on that right now. It should be out not too distant future. So it is all web. It is all app-based now, but there will be lots of web components coming.
Wow, that's awesome. So as far as the revenue model at this point, so someone is obviously purchasing the hardware and they're using the app. Is there a continued subscription with the app? So let's talk like end consumer first. The person that loves training just wants to use it every day. What does your revenue model look like there?
Yeah, right now the end consumers are not paying a subscription, and there's pros and cons to that, obviously. So it's purely device-based sales, and then the subscription factor is the coaches right now who have signed up to the coaching platform. Now, the thing we're working to with the web-based platform with the workout library and all sorts of other things will be a premium version, essentially, of Morpheus. You see this in all the apps, right? So everyone has some sort of premium. I wanted to make sure that before we charged a subscription that I was so confident what we were developing was the most valuable thing ever that people wouldn't even blink at it. I didn't want to just throw something together and say, oh, here's a subscription fee. I hate that. And there's a lot of apps out there. Whoop's a good example. It's $20-$30, and I think the turnover on their apps, their subscription is extremely high from what I've heard. I don't think they're delivering the value there to get people to use it long term. So I want to make sure that whatever we launch from a subscription standpoint, that it's insanely valuable and people don't think for a second about how much it costs and they get the most out of it. And also, I'm never going to make it so you can't use Morpheus without subscription like a lot of these apps are doing. I want to make it so that if you buy a device from us, or even your own device, you can still use Morpheus and use a good number of the features. It'll just take a subscription to unlock some of the higher level stuff that you'll have optionally. And so that's what we're working towards, but it's part of the next process.
Right, which I think is a great plan. I think that's the one. So I have an Oura ring, and when Aura's flipped to their subscription model, like I had the one before, I think I had Gen 2, and then it was like Gen 3, and now you had to have a subscription to have it. And even if it was like $6-8 a month, maybe, we're not a lot, but it's just kind of like the matter of fact of like, hey, you created this thing for free and had it out for everyone, and now we're just you got to use a subscription in order to have it. So I think that's.
I get it. They're answering to much bigger investors and they have a much bigger scale, that's their decision. But, I'm not going to give everyone, thousands of users Morpheus and be like, oh, never mind. You got to keep paying monthly if you want to keep using it. Like, that's just such a dick move. In my mind, it would piss me off if someone did it to an app I was using. So I'm not going to do it. Anything that we have now will always be free. And it's the stuff we add from a premium standpoint will always be optional. And you can choose to get more out of it, and you can choose not to.
Hey there, coaches! Are you ready to take your coaching game to the next level? Get ready for an unforgettable experience at the Super Coach Summit. Join us at Reston, Virginia on August 24th and 25th, where top-tier coaches from the best in the industry will converge to share insights, strategies, and inspiration. And here's the best part. Lock in your spot with our super early bird ticket. Don't miss out on this limited time offer to save big and secure your seat among coaching's elite. Connect, learn, and grow alongside the best in the industry. Get your super early bird tickets now. Visit virtual.supercoachsummit.com for more information and to secure your spot today.
Well, I think that's one of the benefits too of being kind of where you're at. Like you're in a little bit, you can kind of control your own destiny to an extent, right? You didn't bring on a ton of big investors that are looking for a return early on, and you have to try and find monetization strategies that maybe aren't necessarily congruent with what you want to do. And so I think that's one of the benefits of trying to own as much as you can for as long as possible. And probably a uniqueness in you were working in this field and were able to drive income from other places, which allowed you to kind of let this thing slow grow on the side and keep funding it. And so, it's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that was also just important point. That's a very deliberate choice. And, there's two models and, both have their pros and cons. One is, as you know, you go out, you raise as much money as you possibly can, you burn through it quickly, trying to grow and show more customers or more subscribers or whatever. You don't make shit for money, but you just continue to try to pour money into it, and you keep going to get more investors and more investors, and you either kind of hit it big and you get traction and you catch fire and you fuel it and you sell out, or you go bust. And the second happens a lot more than the former. I mean, good thing being from Seattle and having a lot of tech connections. I know a lot of people that have started companies from scratch, and I know some of them sold for hundreds of millions. I know most of them went tits up, and some fell somewhat in between. A friend of mine that worked at Microsoft and I was coaching for a long time was like, I'm going to leave Microsoft and go to this startup called Tableau. And I was like, what the hell is Tableau? Why would you go to Tableau? You're Microsoft, stupid. Like, stay there. Right. And of course, he was like number 8 or something like that. The company, they went public, they're huge. So I was like, don't listen to me again. But if you're a founder and you want to take that gamble, like take the gamble, but it is a gamble. You need a lot of things to happen. You need the right time, the right place, the right product. You need the right people around. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to happen for that model to go big. And even when they do go big, sometimes they go big and then they explode. I mean, look at things like WeWork or Theranos. I mean, you can raise $1 billion and you can still completely fall flat your ass. Right. So I'm not saying the average person is going to do that, but I deliberately said, kind of from the beginning, like I'd rather grow Morpheus much more slowly and have a chance to build a really quality product that can transform people's training and make a real difference. And if I don't make $100 million out of it, so what? I can build something that's meaningful to people and valuable in the process, and I can have a lot less chance of the exploding. And again, I still had the gold thing almost cause it to happen, but I deliberately have avoided just pounding on every financial door possible, trying to raise every dollar possible, and then pour every dollar I have into growth at the expense of actually developing a really good product. So it was a very deliberate choice because I've seen too many people take that route, and far, far, far more of them have ultimately had to close the doors and then make it through. And I'm 44 now, I'm 25, so the different mindset as well.
Right. Yeah. Survivorship bias is a real thing. Right. We see the winners, and we don't tend to see all of the losers that happen in that process.
And there are a lot.
Right. So, personal question: you paying yourself yet?
I have paid myself some from Morpheus. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm fortunate that my other company 8 weeks out makes 7 figures plus. Like I don't really need to. I could if I wanted to, and I've paid myself a little bit here and there on occasion, but not really. I mean, I certainly could right now, but I just I'm fortunate. I don't need to.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Man, I love what you're building. I think this thing is incredible. So if people want to learn a little bit more about Morpheus and kind of get into this whole world, what are some of the best places to learn more about it?
Some of the easiest ways is just the website, trainwithmorpheus.com. And, that probably should have been the first clue. That's where I should have focused, is the website's trainwithmorpheus.com. It's not Recover with Morpheus. It made more sense. If they want to just kind of get into the science or look more about HRV or training, conditioning, my philosophy, it's 8 weeks out. It's never 8weeksout.com. That's where all my education and content lives. And then Trade Morpheus is where they can actually get it. But I'd say if you're...
Has the website always been Train with Morpheus since the beginning?
Yeah, from day one. Yeah, it's always been Train with Morpheus. So
awesome.
I probably had the right idea to start with, and maybe talk myself into something that was, maybe not as clean cut as it should have been. But at the end of the day, I'm a conditioning coach. That's what I've spent most of my career doing. So the training side is really what I should have focused on all along. But the recovery, the HRV piece is so crucial to that. I think it was easy to kind of like try to do everything. That's really the best thing I'd say. I tried to do everything. I tried to do all of it, rather than streamline and say, no, Morpheus is not everything. It's a training app. And what separates it from other training apps is that recovery, the HRV piece. That's what we use. That's our secret sauce to make your training better. But it's not a recovery app just for the sake of giving you a recovery score. It's a recovery app that takes that recovery information and gives it to you in a way that makes your training better. And, just that perspective probably took longer than it should have to come to fruition. But here it is.
Man, I love it. You sold me. So I want to be jumping on it and grabbing some so I can start including it in some of my own training. So
awesome.
Yeah, man. Is there anything else that you want to share? Train with Morpheus, 8 weeks out. Anything else? Anywhere else you live on the web?
No, I mean, those are the two main ones. I'm on Instagram here and there a bit. I'm not a huge, to be honest with you, social media person where I'm just sharing 10 videos a day and posting pictures of me eating and training and sleeping and everything in between. Maybe it's just the age factor, but I know some people are on there all the time. But if you want to follow me on IG, it's Coach Joel Jamison. My name's IESON if you want to look that up. When you find some stuff on there, but mostly 8 weeks out and share with Morpheus are the best ways to find me, and go from there.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to share the story. It's super inspiring, and I think there's gonna be big things coming from Morpheus over the next couple of years. I'm excited to watch the growth, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, like I said, it's definitely been a long journey looking back on it, but you just kind of take it as it comes, and you try to weather the storms and hope you come out on the other side. And so far, we're still out and growing well now. So it's exciting to see, and I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Coach Catalyst podcast. If you are a coach looking to do more for your clients than just workouts, give Coach Catalyst a test drive. Try it for 14 days. Jump on call with your personal strategy coach, Ashley, and see how easy technology can be, all for free. Tell them Trevor sent you. Until next time, keep changing lives.